This is The Light of St. Lucy continued. Chapter 4 The Lady of Light. Castaldo Rupert Belsnickel tromped through the woods on foot, leading his trusty donkey, carrying various supplies, mostly of bread and firewood. Belsnickel was plenty warm, wrapped in his layers of furs, his long coat, and his heavy scarf that covered his face. He didn't mind walking out in the cold winter day. Aside from the fact that he did have such heavy warm clothes and good boots that kept his feet dry, he was used to spending most of his time outdoors. For much of his life he was a wandering homeless vagabond. He would sometimes work as a hired hand here or there for farmers who would pay him with food and sometimes with a little money. But he would eventually grow restless and return to wandering again. If you asked, most people would tell you that Castaldo Rupert Belsnickel, while a hard worker, was a grumpy old curmudgeon who was blunt, sometimes rude, and rarely smiled. Except for children who knew him well. They knew better. Well, at first, Belsnickel seemed crusty and stern, and he was stern when he needed to be. Children learned that he was full of wondrous stories, tales, and songs that he would share with them after only a small amount of pestering. Not only did the tales and songs delight the children, but Belsnickel would tell them with such animation and expression, and with much more smiling, that he seemed an entirely different person than the one that most of the adults knew. When he finished his tales for children, he would then return to a mock stern expression and threaten the children with a small wooden switch, a small stick, to leave him alone and stop pestering him. The children delighted in his mock severity and would jump and squeal with delight and scamper away home in time for supper. While children delighted in this, many of the adults did not seem to care much for Belsnickel. He seemed more an unlikable nuisance to them than anything. Besides, Belsnickel himself would grow restless, being in one place too long. He always felt like he never quite fit. He felt he was supposed to live for some greater purpose that he had not yet found. But, not so long ago, he unexpectedly met someone wandering in the woods, and everything changed. He was given a great new purpose. A young maiden he met who taught him many things. She was clothed in a white gown, girded with a red sash, and crowned with an evergreen wreath with candles. She taught him new stories to share with the children, and new songs and new prayers. Stories of the light, the Maker himself, who had come down into the world to free the world from the power of darkness and death. How the light came down in an unusual way, not in rich palaces of great kings and many servants, but born of a poor peasant girl, by majestic heralds, but poor shepherds. But born of a poor peasant girl in a stable and laid in a manger, for there was no room in the inn. His birth was not announced by majestic heralds, but by poor shepherds. Though there were angels, a star, and 3 kings bearing gifts, Belsnickel felt he had begun to finally find his purpose, to know his place in the world as he shared these stories, songs, and prayers with children. And as he shared what she, the maiden, had taught him, his own heart was softened. He began to be kinder to other grown-ups, to smile more. He had not seen the mysterious maiden for some time until recently. Only some days ago she appeared to him again, and this time called him to accompany her on a mission to bring light to the Northlands, as she had said. And so he had accompanied her here to this village, And then she told him to go to the nearby villages bearing bread and light, as she called it. They loaded his donkey with the baskets of bread and firewood to take to the people. But she instructed him that he was not only bringing them bread and light, but also the bread and the light. That is, to share the stories of the bread of life and the light of the world, and to teach them not only these stories, but prayers and hymns. He also was to invite them, if they wished, to come into the village to meet her, to pray with her, and to accompany her on her mission. Belsnickel was wandering now, looking for people to share bread and light, and the bread and the light with, when he saw an unusual troop wandering through the woods. It looked to be a group of 14 children. As he got closer, he realized only one was a child, a little girl. The rest were all very little men, no taller than the little girl. They had funny pointed hats and funny beards, and had strapped to their backs an assortment of large bowls, pots, pans, shovels, and toboggans. "Hail!" he greeted them. "And what be you folks doing in these here woods?" The one in front, with a deep blue hat decorated in stars, said, "Greetings. We are looking for the Lady of Light. I saw her just last night in a village near here. Do you know where we could find her?" Belsnickel smiled again, one of his rare smiles. Aye, he knew exactly who they were talking about, because it was this same Lady of Light that he had met some months ago that had changed his life. "Come, I will take you to her." As they approached the village, Sophie grabbed Gollygawk's arm excitedly. "Gollygawk, Mr. Gollygawk, this village is my home," she said. Gollygawk smiled. "Well, I mean, it is the village of my home. I actually live with my father in a cottage some miles from town, but people in the town could give me news of my father. He is well known and respected." Belsnickel led them into the village, which was milling with people. It seemed many people had heard the news of the Lady of Light, especially from Belsnickel, and had come curious to see her. They had also heard that she had brought with her much bread and light to carry them through these dark days. As they wandered through the town, Sophie saw many people she recognized and greeted them happily and excitedly. However, her excitement began to dwindle with each conversation, because she asked each of them of news of her father, and no one knew anything. Belsnickel then brought them to that larger building in the center of town, with a large wooden cross on top. "Look," she said to Gollygawk, pointing to the building, "that's the village church. My father was among the first ones to be baptized when the priest came into town. My father even helped build the church. He tells me I was baptized in the church shortly after I was born. It was also, he said, where they prayed for my mother after she died. I never knew my mother. She died shortly after I was born." "Oh," was all Gollygawk could think of to say. People were crowded around and outside the front doors of the church. A black-robed monk with other helpers were distributing bread and firewood to the crowd. They shoveled past the crowd and went into the church. The church was full of people sitting, kneeling, or standing in quiet prayer. Gollygawk was surprised that with this many humans in one place, that they were able to be as quiet as they were. There was the occasional cough, the soft shuffling and creaking of pews or floorboards, and some soft whisperings of prayers. But even with these sounds, there was an overarching sense of serene quiet about the place. The peacefulness was deepened by the flickering of candlelight that lit this space. It stirred up the same feelings for Gollygawk as it did when he looked at his stardust, from that one special star that he had kept hooked to his belt. Even though he had lost all the rest of the stardust he had ever collected, He was grateful that he had this bit still strapped to his belt. For the rest of the gnomes, they also felt the stirrings of their hearts, that they had felt when they met Sophie, her words calling them to nobility, the songs she sang to them, the feelings of bravery, of compassion, of hope, and of peace. Though again, the gnomes had no words for these feelings. Up front, in one corner of the church, were a line of people waiting to speak and pray quietly with someone. A beautiful maiden who looked very kindly. She wore a simple white gown with a red sash, and on a little table next to her sat a wreath with candles, which Gullygawk had seen her wearing on her head the night before. "The Lady of Light," Gullygawk whispered to Sophie and the other gnomes, and he pointed. Sophie could hear the admiration in his voice. "Look at her light," Gullygawk said. Sophie saw no other light other than the ordinary candlelight, but Gullygawk and the other gnomes seemed to see some deeper, hidden light that seemed to stir something in them. Indeed, as Gullygawk looked at the lady, tears welled up in his eyes. "Mr. Gullygawk, are you all right?" Sophie asked, noticing his tears. He smiled. "Yes, my little Sophie, I am better than I have ever been," he said sincerely. Belsnickel brought them to the line of people. When it was their turn, they quietly approached the lady. She smiled warmly. "Greetings, Castaldo," she said to Belsnickel. "I see you found the Yule lads, and little Sophie. I've been waiting for you," the lady said. "Waiting for us?" Meathook asked, skeptical. "But how did you know we were coming? We didn't even know we were coming until this morning. Why, if it hadn't been for the foolish antics of Gullygawk, we would be—" His voice trailed off as she smiled warmly at him. He had been rambling, working himself up into a big harumph, but then as he looked at her, his grumpiness seemed to seep away. He simply stopped talking and smiled back. "My Yule lads, my dear Sophie, you do not know me, but I do know you. My name is Lucy. I have been sent here to you by the king for a special mission." The Yule lads then in loud whispers began asking questions all at the same time. "King? What king? A mission? What mission? A human king? Which one? We don't serve a human king. The fairy king? Are you fey? Are you an angel?" She laughed and raised her hands to quiet them down. "I know you have many questions, but let me try and explain the best I can. I am neither fey nor an angel. I am simply human, like Sophie here. But I have been called and sent by the king, that is the king of all kings, human or fey, the lord of all lords, whose name is above every other name, before whom all knees must bend and all hearts must bow, of all powers and spirits in heaven and on earth and under the earth. It is he who is the light that has come and is coming into the world. It is this light I bear. It was he who is this light that sent me here to you." Ma'am, Miss Lucy, I mean, I wanted to ask you, about my father. Do you know him, or know where he is?" Sophie asked, haltingly, eyes both hopeful and afraid. Lucy looked with loving eyes on little Sophie, and placed a hand on her shoulder and drew her close. "My dear Sophie, yes, I do know who your father is. It was partly because of his fervent prayers and intercessions for the people of this land, crying out for Emmanuel to come with help from heaven, that the King of Kings sent me here to you. Your father is a good man. full of the light himself. And many have come to know the light more fully because of his prayers, his love and care and kindly service for them. Now be brave, little Sophie. I will tell you that your father, along with many others, has been captured by the Draugr. Many of these who are here in prayer are from neighboring villages, and have had family members, friends, and loved ones also taken by the Draugr. Sophie gasped, but Lucy continued. But your father and the others are still alive, and together, this very night, we shall go and rescue him and the others from the clutches of the Draugr. For that is the very mission for which I have been sent. And what is that mission? Asked Gollygawk. To bear the light here to this land, to break the power of death and darkness, and thus to scatter the minions, the slaves of death and darkness, and to break their power. What do you mean? Asked Meathook. Her eyes now shone with a bright determination. I mean to defeat and break the power of the Draugr once and for all. The Yule lads and Sophie all gasped. Defeat the Draugr? And how? Only the greatest, strongest, and most legendary of heroic warriors have ever defeated a single Draugr, and that often at great cost. How do you think a petite, pretty little maiden like you is going to defeat all the Draugr? Meathook said, skepticism returning to his voice. She smiled. You're right, Meathook. Meathook looked surprised, both that she knew his name and that she affirmed his skepticism. He had been ready to grumpily argue his point. I, a single young maiden, can do nothing against these forces of darkness or death, not by my own power at least. Thus it is not by my power that they will be defeated. It is only by the power of the light of the king, the Maker himself, who was born into the world, and you will help me to bear this light. But how? Asked Gollygawk. We are but simple gnome mischief makers. We know nothing about light and battles and defeating death. She smiled. Ah, yes. But you see, I've been waiting for you, because you have brought something with you, Gollygawk. Something precious that you have carried with you, hooked to your belt. Gollygawk's eyes widened as his hand went to the pouch on his waist. My special stardust? He asked. She nodded. That special star you saw shine some centuries ago was a very, very special star. You see, it was the Christmas star itself, the star that heralded the coming of the light himself into the world, the dayspring from on high. As it says in the hymn I think you know, O come thou dayspring from on high, and cheer us by thy drawing nigh. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night until death's dark shadow is put to flight. And that star announced the kings coming into the world, and that star led the Magi to find the King of Kings in Bethlehem. The stardust you have there, Gollygawk, my star boy, as your brothers call you, is of that Christmas star, and so has been touched with the light of the angels themselves, the very light of the Maker himself, the light that is the source of all light itself. You will help me bear this light. When the light came into the world on his mission, he called 12 men, and a 13th to be his heralds. His missionaries he sent forth. So in a similar way, you 12 and a 13th gnomes of the Fae, that is, of the fairy folk, are being called to be bearers of this light. For the Fae, the fairy folk, were created by the Maker for the noble purpose of serving the great powers and spirits, that is, the angels, and in doing so to serve the light himself, sharing in his work of unfolding the beauty and wonder of creation. But one day, The fairy folk saw that all of this was to be at the service of humankind, that the great angels they served and the creation they helped unfold, the Maker intended to be at the service of humankind. Thus many of the Fey folk, influenced by the whisperings of fallen angels, abandoned their stations, forgetting their noble purpose. But now the light has come into the world to redeem all creation. Will you, Yule lads, take up again this noble station to be at the service of the light once again? What must we do? Asked Gollygawk. It begins with you, Gollygawk. The stardust in your pouch. It has to be distributed evenly into 13 lamps. Gollygawk looked down. Do I have to use all of it? Yes, Lucy said firmly. All of it. What we receive as a gift is to be given as gift. Any gift hoarded for ourselves will eventually turn to dust and ashes. But when we share what we have, it becomes far more. Gollygawk nodded. I understand. In fact, I think I understand that better now than I would have even a day ago. He glanced at Sophie and winked at her. The other gnomes nodded in agreement. Good. Then as bearers of the light, I will give each of you gnomes a new name, the names of the 12 apostles and the 13th. She then gave them each a name of one of the 12 apostles, briefly explaining to them the story of that apostle and why she chose it for that particular Yule lad. As each received their name, they seemed to swell with a newfound courage, bravery, and nobility. And finally, Gollygawk, I dub you with the name of the 13th apostle, St. Paul. She then instructed Castaldo, Rupert, Belsnickel to gather 13 lanterns for the Yule lads, and to gather the people, for it was time for the march of their mission to begin.